To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meyer Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Kristin Walker here, and we're here with Dr. Lisa Day this week. You're going to hear this whenever you hear it, but the time that we're recording it is April 1st through the 7th, which is Teen Health Week. So there have been so many shows across our network that we've done on teen suicide and suicidal ideation. And so Dr. Lisa Day is going to introduce to you what we're going to narrow down on with that on our show today.
Thank you, Kristin. And what I think about is when in talking today is the epidemic of teen suicide. And really, when I come from my gut, it's that I say it's real, folks. It's not something that we're seeing on a Netflix, 13 Reasons Why. It's not something that's happening on TV or that kid from the troubled family, down the street. It's happening to my kid, your kid. It's an epidemic, in our country. And we've never seen such levels, of suicide. And, to think of them as dropping like flies is just not even putting into perspective. Currently, what we know to be true is that death by suicide is the second leading cause of death in people between the ages of 15 and 24. And that is overwhelming. The second leading cause. And when I looked, further, it's estimated that worldwide, and this isn't isolated to teens, but worldwide, it's estimated that 1.5 million people will take their lives this year. And it's an epidemic. And so, my interest in doing this show is that we can begin to normalize the mental health awareness, and the need for mental health awareness. And so many times as parents and families and communities, we think about physical wellness of getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, developing a good social group. But many folks are not comfortable talking about the mental wellness, in their children. And so many kids are suffering with extreme depression, and suicidal ideation without having the vehicle really to talk about it. So my hopes in doing this podcast is that we can bring to the awareness, this epidemic, and that we can give some tools to how to begin to talk to our kids about mental health, about suicidal ideation, about self-harm in a manner that we can hopefully decrease this over time. Sadly, we were seeing a decline in suicide rates for, about 2 decades. And then oddly, and we don't know the causal effects, but, since the, introduction of social media, we've seen a 70% increase. So, what is the correlation there? The jury's out on that and much research is needed. But what we do know clinically and practically is we need to address this issue.
Agreed. And it's been really interesting this week to see how much of it is being talked about all over the place. And we wouldn't have seen that years ago. We wouldn't have even seen that 2 years ago. Now it's being talked about so much, and it's welcome on, network television, radio, podcasts. And that to me, it's not solving the crisis that we're in, but it's making us all aware, and it's making the conversation around it lose the stigma, which is what's going to eventually lead to, I hope, fewer incidences of suicide.
Well, and the reality is that youth, teens, adolescents, when they threaten suicide, it has to be taken seriously.
Yes.
They're not just looking for attention. Oftentimes parents will say, well, they talk about it, but all the kids are talking about it. In fact, our therapist in California said, not really a big risk. And my position today, and it would have been different probably years ago, but my position today clinically is if your child uses the word suicide and they're having thoughts or they're saying, I don't have much to look forward to, it has to be taken seriously. It has to be. I mean, the incidence, 20% of high school teens think about suicide on a regular basis. That's 1 in 5 kids. It's huge, and with suicide, I mean, there's definitely, things differ and there's variability, but when kids talk about it, that's our first indication that they're contemplating it.
Yeah.
And the suicide rates are up 70%. It's not something that we can ignore.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is it's not, because of some of the great guests I've had, it's not always the kids that you would maybe assume are contemplating suicide. It can be the captain of the football team. It can be the straight A student who's in, the master chess club. It can be, the prom queen. I mean, it's across the board. And it can also be the kid that gets, that is a social outcast, because we know how high school can be. It can be that kid too. So, but there is no way to look at a kid from the outside and see how they present themselves. There isn't always a way to know that kid is having a struggle, because if they're anyway, you know more on that than I do, Lisa.
Well, absolutely, and the kids have as much variety as there is in fruit, right? I mean, they're all different, and not everyone even gives warning signs, and unfortunately, they have no I mean, there are and we'll talk about risk factors and warning signs, but you can have a straight A student who's the president of the student body. In fact, there's several of those cases that occurred in colleges across the country this past year, and they take their life, and people shake their heads and they said, we didn't see it coming. And so, education and educating ourselves about risk factors and warning signs and really how to talk to our kids about this issue is profound. And many of us think about the typical warning signs, right? We think if someone is severely depressed or has a mental illness or has, extreme anxiety, but there are other more subtle risk factors if the person isn't presenting with mental illness, meaning if they've had a recent or a serious loss, if they've if they have a history or there's someone in the family that has killed themselves, if there's violence in the home, we want to keep an eye out that, feelings of hopelessness and guilt and worthlessness, those are pretty predictable risk factors. But we don't think necessarily that, a straight A kid who's, on their way to an Ivy League school, who's on all the sports teams, who looks by practical assessment to have it all together, that is a risk factor. And because what we're seeing with those kids is that they're not able to embrace, in many circumstances, the reality of limitations. And so they're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're not able to keep up with that pushing. And whether it's impulsive or whether it's premeditated, they're taking their lives.
And it's even more so when we look at Anthony Bourdain, Kate Spade, and so many other people that, you looked at from the outside and you were like, why on earth would this person be contemplating suicide? That really changed the conversation. Of course, when we look at students that have been at a school where there has been a school shooting, of course, all hands on deck, everyone is watching all of those students, every single one of them, after a tragedy like that. But we aren't looking enough at the schools where that hasn't happened yet, sadly, in some cases, where it is the kids that are the ones that look like, hey, they've got it all together.
Well, and we are at an all-time high. I mean, in all of history, well, our 40-year history, which isn't all of history, but we're at an all-time high, and there's many reasons, why our kids are struggling today, and both with depression and suicidal ideation, and some that we are all over media, because of, was it Sadie Riggs, the redhead who was mocked for having demon hair or devil's hair, but mocked so much through Facebook and Instagram that she ultimately hung herself. And so we think about the bullying as being a major factor, but we don't think about heavy media, social media use, economic stressors, stressors within the home, family discord. Obviously, trauma puts people at risk, but Academic stress, again, one of the main, contributors to increased depression and therefore, suicidal ideation. And, so when we think about warning signs, if we have our kids and when folks come into my office, how do I know if my child is thinking about hurting themselves? And it's a myriad of presentations. And back in the day, again, cutting with self-harm, which is, all over media and very, very common with the kids. Historically, we wouldn't see that necessarily as a risk for suicide. We would perhaps see that as a borderline personality characteristic, the self-mutilation or a dysfunctional coping mechanism. But absolutely now, we consider that an active warning sign because it's dysfunctional, it's self-mutilation. But the other ones, that the clear ones of, when your child comes to you and says, I have nothing to live for, I want to die. I want to kill myself. We can't turn our back on that. And one of the strange things, Kristin, and being a parent myself, I understand this. We don't want to hear that from our kids.
Right.
So if our child comes to us and says, I can't do this, I can't do this, I have no reason to live, I want to kill myself. Our first temptation for many of us parents is to say, oh, honey, that doesn't make any sense. You have a great life. You have a great social group. You're loved by your family. This is just a phase. When I was a kid, I went through it, and you'll look back and this will mean nothing. And we don't want to do that.
Right.
What we want when our kids come to us and say that, we really want to attend to it. We really want to listen. And, because of our own discomfort, we parents, we start talking a million miles a minute, giving them all the reasons why they should not feel that way,
Yes.
which as a child, they just feel discredited.
Yeah, invalidating.
Yeah.
And then there's the kids that don't want to tell you because they don't want to make you feel bad. And that was my son. I knew that he struggled with depression. I tried to talk about it with him, and he didn't want to talk about it. And thank goodness, nothing happened with him. But later in life, when he, was in his early 20s, he started to share with me just how bad it was. And I said, honey, you know that you could talk to me about anything. Look at what I do. And he said, yeah, I know. I didn't want to scare you. I didn't want to burden you because you already do so much. I didn't want you to feel bad and worry. I didn't want to add to your worries. And I was like,
he wanted to protect you. Yeah, he
Yes.
wants to protect you. Or in other circumstances, they don't want to let you down. So
Yes.
if I've got it relatively together and I'm saying, what, when I drive my car, I think about hitting that tree.
Yeah.
I don't want to let you down, to let you see my weakness. One of the things that I teach often, all the time, not only with teens, but with adults alike, is learning how to embrace our limitations, learning how to embrace our weaknesses, learning how to embrace our pain. But many teens, they're not going to go there, and then they don't have the capacity to bring it to their folks. And then you have the other variable of, you ask your kid to take the trash out and scoop the poop, and they say, oh God, I can't do it, I'm going to kill myself. And so, it's the manipulative component, and kids do manipulate. So we have the want to protect you, we have the I don't want you to see my weaknesses, and then we have to filter out when is it manipulation. And I tell folks today, listen to all of it. Listen to all of it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, how do you, because I remember a friend of mine in high school who that is how she got money out of her parents. That is how she got out of getting in trouble. Oh, I'm suicidal. She just was constantly threatening suicide, and they took it seriously every single time. And I haven't seen her in 30 years. I don't know if she's still here. I hope so. But even, I, who was on calls with other friends who we would make agreements. Okay, I would say to them, you can't kill yourself until after we talk next Friday. And then every time we would talk on Friday, I would say the same thing. And that was like our thing, was to do that. And they were only telling this to me, and then they would tell their peer counselor, because I was doing all these peer counseling things in high school. So there was those kids that were hiding it. And then there were the ones that were just, I'm just going to, I don't want to do that essay. So I'm fine, then I'll just kill myself. And those are the ones where I was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to react to that. So I wonder how do you react to that with parents that are, that are dealing with that, and teachers and so on?
Well, you touch upon a couple of different issues there, which is very profound. And so because most parents are not licensed, clinicians. We don't have the skill to differentiate what is manipulation or avoidance of responsibility and what is genuine suicidal ideation and perhaps suicidal plan. But and so what I would counsel in that first example of the girlfriend who was manipulating is that from a parental point of view, we would just come at it head on, that if asking you to take out the trash is overwhelming to the point, and you have to say it kind and compassionate, you can't use facetiousness because then you lose all your power. But so if in fact we're being said I can't take out the trash because I'm going to be suicidal, we want to address that kind, compassionate fashion. We want to say, if indeed you are operating a level that request is making you want to kill yourself, then we need to seek help, honey. We need to take a look at what's going on. So you come straight to it, not back away, reinforcing that dysfunctional manipulative behavior.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that I noticed that happened with another friend that used to do that. It was a young man who used to constantly threaten suicide. His parents said, okay, then you're going into the hospital right now. And I'm not going to do that. And that was the consequence of constantly throwing down that card was, well, you've said it enough times. We take this seriously. And he was put into a hospital. And when he got out, he never threatened that again, because it was like, we're going to take it seriously. So it was really interesting. And now we invite our fantastic guest, Frank King. He's known as the mental health comedian, and he was a writer for Jay Leno for over 20 years. If I keep going on and on and on, we'll be here for 3 hours just talking about all of his accomplishments, so I'll stop. But the most important thing is he talks about, in his comedy shows, suicidal ideation, and so that is why we wanted him to come on and talk with Dr. Day and I. So Frank, thanks for joining us.
I am delighted to be here, and like most comedians, I am tardy. You guys don't know this, but comedy shows back in the day when I was still doing clubs, the owners of the clubs would always tell the comedian, the show starts at 8, and then you get there and the show starts at 9. Because they knew if they said 9, then the comedian would be there about 9:10.
Well, we were just talking about the importance of learning how to embrace our limitations, or i.e. weaknesses. So you're right on board, buddy.
Oh, man. I'm all over.
Welcome.
That'll be the object lesson there, kiddos.
So Frank, we're talking about, since this is Teen Health Week, we're really focused on, that there are so many more teenagers that are in trouble right now than ever before. I think I just repeated the same thing, but anyway, we're talking about that, and we wanted to know, what your thoughts were around this issue and the volume that is increasing, even with the fact that there's much more awareness that's out there.
Yeah, and in Lane County, Oregon, where I live, the suicide rate is 40% above the national average, and I think with teenagers it may be close to 30% above the national average. And this is a county that actually offers mental health, facilities and treatment, and there's an active NAMI chapter, and there are 8 counties in Oregon where there is nothing, and their teen suicide rate is lower than ours. So it's hands in the air. What is going on?
Wow.
What are we doing wrong?
And in Idaho, I think we're one of the top in the country, and we see the same thing. In our county here, not only do we have lots of services and NAMI and huge education and awareness, and each resident in our county has $200 mental health money available, but still they're dropping like flies, and the epidemic is frightening and concerning, huge issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been begging the county school system to let me into to middle schools and high schools, and to talk about not only suicide prevention, but my mental benefits, the upside of mental illness, to help reframe for these kids, their mental illness into a combination of mental illness and mental ableness, to change their frame and the frame for their peers. And I can't get any traction. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's really odd. It is odd. So I don't want to say something as highly charged as, well, maybe the amount of talking about it is having a negative impact, but it's I don't know what to say about that. Where you aren't talking about it, you're seeing a reduction in the amount of suicides, and where we are talking about it, we're seeing an increase. What do you make of that, Lisa?
Oh, I'm so on the edge of my seat because, on one hand, we want to talk about mental health. We want to talk about suicide risk and warning signs. And we want our kids to be able to talk to us not only about their own experience, but their friends. But what I see, and I've never seen this in the history of the work that I've been doing, what I see, and I don't know if it's media or where it's coming from, but that suicide is an option. Follow me? So what I hear from the kids is, whatever it is, like I failed my exam, or I didn't get accepted to the team, or I was dropped from the team, or what have you. And it goes like this: I can't deal with this. I got to kill myself. It's not, I can't deal with this. What are my steps in moving forward? It's an option. It's, I can't do this. I got to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I have my own theories, but one of my concerns with social media is it interferes with our kids' ability to develop healthy problem-solving skills. Meaning, I remember back in the day when I was riding my horse out and got caught in barbed wire, and part of its front muscle, came out, and I was, a mile from home. I had to hold that muscle. It looked like a rib roast, bleeding all over, figure out how to get back to the house, how to get in the house with the horse who was bleeding profusely, and call the veterinarian and get an emergency ride. Meaning, we had to problematically think through as a result of being out in the real world. And so what I see practically, and I don't have any research to support it, is that one, a huge void in problem-solving ability, and two, it's a coping option, or it's an option for stress and hardship.
Well, as somebody with chronic suicidality, it's always been an option. It's Dr. Mark Goulson said he had a client. Dr. Mark is one of our podcasters. Said he had a client one time say, Doc, if I didn't have my chronic suicidality, in other words, the option of suicide, I would have killed myself a long time ago. So I see the appeal of having that. I can see how, in a strange way, an appeal of having that as an option. I think the problem is they now apparently are completing it. It's one thing to think about it and, as sort of a stress reliever. It's another thing to actually, obviously, go through with it.
So can you explain for our listeners here what suicidal ideation is and how that's manifested, how that presented itself and presents itself in your life?
It's it's called chronic suicidality. I think in the literature, it's also chronic suicidal ideation. It means, for me and my tribe, people with mental illness, that the option of suicide is always on the menu for problems, as a solution for problems large and small. The example I give is, a couple of years ago, my car broke down. I had 3 thoughts, unbidden. 1, get it fixed. 2, buy a new one. 3, or I could just kill myself. It's just option C that my brain constantly tosses up as, hey, why don't you try this? It's been happening so long that often when I have that thought, I think, now there's a good idea. Mockingly, but and it's just, I don't know. I'm not sure why the teenagers have made that step across the line from that point. I can see it coming up as an option, but I never seriously consider it. I mean, I have had times in my life when it was a consideration, but day in, day out, with everyday frustrations. So I'm curious, as you are, why that extra step across the line? Why are they willing to go? And I just talked to a woman in Phoenix. They've had a number of youth suicides in the last 3-4 months, bordering on a contagion, it seems to me. And she asked, why? Why do you see these clusters? And I wish I had an answer for her.
I think that's what puzzles all of us, especially in the healthcare, field of, why the 70% increase and why the epidemic. And, I think the why will be something that we'll continue to research, all over the place. And, we have the risk factors, we have the warning signs, but then we have those folks who don't fall within the risk factors or the warning signs, or someone like yourself who has that chronic, suicidal ideation. Those people yourself, we can look at how to monitor or how to support or, how to navigate through that. But we've got the other half that are impulsive, or it's drug related. I mean, their serotonin goes up after abusing, any number of drugs. It drops, 4 stories, 5 stories, 40 stories down, and it's an impulsive act. And there's, this, and there's no single cause of what, bring someone to the point of taking their lives. But boy, it sure is happening all over the place.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
So what would you say when we're talking about this? What would you say, Lisa, that you tell parents, what to look for, since it is all over the place?
Oh, that's a great question. There are so many things to look for. The biggest one is change in behavior, and that can encompass a number of things: sleeping more, sleeping less; eating more, eating less; social isolation. There we go. Withdrawal. Changes in their habits, grades dropping. Obviously, we were talking a little bit before you jumped on with regard to self-harm. So, the cutting, the self-mutilation, feeling certainly, statements such as I feel lonely, I feel hopeless, I feel helpless, I have no reason to live, but that's assuming the kids are going to verbalize that. And so the nonverbal, it's what I see to be the most consistent factor is lack of connection and loneliness. So they're isolated. We've got two working members of a family, and we've got the social media, and we've got the teens in general are going through this. Where do I belong? Who am I? And left and right, they're getting mixed messages of whether they belong or not. But the non-behaviorals are more a significant change in behavior, and that significant change would be something that you see academically, something that you see socially, something that you dropping out of sports, lethargy. Their get up and go, got up and went. But, all of those are, symptoms of depression as well. And what we were talking about earlier, Frank, and I don't know if you have any feedback on this, is that one of the things that I experience with families who are concerned about their kids is denial. They don't want it to be their kid. And so there's everybody thinks about that, when they're going through puberty, or, it'll be better in the morning, or you really don't feel that way. And, what I educate parents on all the time is, to go straight to that emotion. I say, listen more, talk less. People get nervous and they want to say, oh, you didn't feel that way. You've got so much to look forward to, and you got a great dog and a great family and a great house. And I tell parents, don't minimize their feelings, validate their feelings, that you or I might not be upset if we didn't get into the choir club, or maybe we would, but it can completely immobilize our teen. Oftentimes, and one of the things I just love, Frank, about your work is that it's putting it out there, right? And, historically, parents are afraid to say, are you okay? Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Have you thought of hurting yourself? We want to stay away from that. They're afraid that if they plant that seed, quote unquote, that their child will take it and run. And I tell folks that that's a myth. That I don't usually see that. If you're concerned and your gut's telling you that something's changed, talk about it. Maintain that connection. We're moving so fast in our world. We move and move and move that we lose touch with that mental, litmus, if you will, of where our kids are and what they're going through.
Well, and nobody wants their child to be anything but perfect. And I think also, could it be that they don't ask because they're afraid of what the answer might be?
Oh, absolutely. They don't want to deal with it. Two, they don't know how to deal with it, and they want to talk their kids out of it. It's terrifying. We were talking earlier. It's not something that we believe is going to happen to us until it does. Right? It's something that it was on, the movie 13 Reasons. Everybody, had all kinds of emotions associated with that movie that Netflix came out a few years ago, and parents came in here angry that the movie was out because all of a sudden their kids are talking about suicide. And I said, that is the goal here. We want our kids to be talking about suicide. Questions, why do people do it? Where, how is it that they come to that place of desperation or impulsivity? But, I don't think that most parents, I don't want my child to come to me and say, Mom, I want to kill myself. I have nothing to live for. I'm hopeless. This life is not for me. I don't belong. We look at that and we think, how do we respond to that? As parents, we want to talk them out of it instead of saying, I can't even imagine what that must feel like for you, baby. Tell me more. That must be paralyzing in your heart. What does that physically feel like? I'm a shrink, so I can move toward that and ask those kinds of questions. But for laymen and for someone who doesn't have, those clinical or that experience such as yourself, we're afraid of that. It frightens us. It threatens us. So we stay away from it.
And not only does it frighten us, I was almost booked at a small religious school in Texas recently. Everything was done except the last signature of the last administrator. And the guy who had found me on the web called me and said, "Frank, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen." And I said, it was part of a health week. They never had anybody come in. They had somebody there from the Diabetes Association and the Heart Association. They never had anybody come in and talk about mental health. And I said, "Why is it not going to happen?" He said, "Well, this administrator said, look, if he comes to campus and he talks about suicide and one of our kids dies by suicide, then we will be liable and the parents will sue us." And he said, "Well, Frank, if I'd been closer to retirement, because if I'd said this to him, I would have lost my job. Okay, if we're going to think like that, we need to change the school mascot to an ostrich." Shove our heads in the sand.
But you know what, Frank? We might be talking about the same school, because I do know of a college, a conservative Christian college in Texas, that a young man took his life, and the family did come and they sued the fraternity. And I was in dialogue with someone about that the other day of what are they thinking? Where can that come from? And so these crazy things like that happen, and hush it. And I know that in my own daughter's college just last week, she phoned me and she was devastated, and she was sharing with me that a young man that she knew of had taken his life, and they were talking about it in her sorority, and the friends were talking about it and the impact that it has on them, and sharing other thoughts with other people. But my daughter was shocked that, the next day, I guess, I don't know if it's the president or whoever has their daily speakings or announcements or however they deliver it, but instead of addressing the tragic loss, of this young man, it was something, of addressing the budget of the school. And she said, "Mom, how is that they can just turn their backs on it?" And I said, "Sweetheart, I think they're afraid of it. I think that our community is afraid and threatened, and we don't have the tools." And that's where, having podcasts like this and the work that you're doing, Frank, is so very valuable. It's real. It is real, and it's 1.5 million people are going to take their lives this year. It's an epidemic, and it's sad to hear those stories about schools, but hopefully through continued education and allowing people and giving people tools of knowing how to talk about suicide, hopefully that will become less of a stigma. Well, I remember back in the day. Oh, I'm sorry, but I remember back in the day when one would take their life, take their own life. There was not a funeral, there was not a memorial. It was hush hush. It was kind of under the carpet. Yeah, and at least now, what I observe, at least in my own walk, is there are memorials, and people are getting braver and braver and coming up and saying, in great sadness, Joe, so and so. Unfortunately came to a place and took his life, and I think that's all a part of the suicide awareness movement.
Well, and I think Dr. Mark Goulston, again, another one of our fabulous podcasters, and I were talking and on his podcast and talking about, there's a thing in California, 5150. It's a police code, meaning that there's someone who is suicidal, apparently immediate risk to themselves or others, and the police arrest you and they take you in front of a judge for an IDO and in involuntary detention order. And he said, "I think, Frank, that's one of the reasons that people, children and adults, do not give voice to their thoughts of suicide, right, because they're afraid that's going to be the outcome." And Jan of Sherry and Jan, other podcasters on this network, Jan is 71, and I was on their podcast. I mentioned chronic suicidality. I described it. And I was watching Jan's face, and when we went to the video segment, Jan said to her mom, "There's something I've never told anyone. There's something I've never told you, Sherry. I have what Frank has. I have those thoughts all the time. It's just like Frank says, I did not want to tell anyone because I thought they would, A, be scared, B, they would freak out and lock me up." And she's 71. She's never told anyone that.
Wow. Well, and the other thing, the 5150 in California, or the Baker Act, which we see in Florida, what I observe practically speaking here in my state is that we don't have tremendous amount of psychiatric facilities. They're usually a couple hours away. And when a child talks about self-harm and suicidality, if a clinician is not properly trained and skilled in that arena, they are admitted to a psychiatric facility for usually 5 to 7, maybe 9 days. And it's terrifying. It's a terrifying facility. Because they're really just hold and medicate facilities, not much happens. There's not deep insight group. There's not cognitive behavioral therapy. There are people which they would come out saying, I was put in the loony bin with freaks of nature. I'm not telling anybody again that I'm suicidal. So it's not only the legal aspect, but it's I'm not doing that again. When what my clients will tell me is I've learned not to tell anybody that I'm suicidal because I don't want to go there, because that wasn't helpful. It wasn't effective in me understanding what's going on or giving me coping mechanisms to be able to navigate through it.
Well, and Mark and I came up with I'm going to do a TED Talk on this, changing the protocol from this. Are you depressed? Yes. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Yes. Do you have a plan? Yes. What is your plan? Well, I have chronic suicidality. I have a half a dozen plans. To the fifth question, are you going to kill yourself? Oh, no, certainly not. So
that's good.
Make that part of the protocol where you could say, yes, I'm having all these thoughts, but no, I'm not going to kill myself. I mean, a young woman came up to me at a college event. She goes, Frank, is it possible to have chronic suicidality and not depression? Do I have to be depressed? I go, no, you don't have to be depressed to have thoughts of. I've had great days where I had thoughts of suicide. It's just, but who's going to give voice to that kind of thing?
Well, and the other part of that, to take it one step forward, are you going to do it? No. What I ask my clients is, what keeps you from it? What keeps you from acting out on that? And I wouldn't do that to my family. I wouldn't want to leave my dog. I don't want to leave that way. And I take it one step further, and that is valid for me. So if someone can give me a believable reason of why they wouldn't, and they can be as simple as no one would feed the horses, that's valid. It's something that with that chronic suicidality, they can refer back to that. Yes, it's on my mind all the time, but I'm not going to follow through with it. And I'm not going to follow through with it because of this reason. I find that very helpful, with them developing, coping mechanisms.
Dr. Lisa, here's my reason, and this is recent, is every time I speak, every time I've spoken, somebody's come up. Somebody's, more than one sometimes, have come up afterwards. They have chronic suicidality. They didn't know it had a name. They thought they were a freak like Jan. They didn't know there were other people like them. And it's happened over and over and over. So the other day, I realized that I am George Bailey, and It's a Wonderful Life. I've been shown what other people's lives would be like if I didn't show up.
Wow.
And to change the trajectory of their life just enough to take them off the path of suicide, because they realize they're not alone. And I can't kill myself now. So.
Well, that's powerful, because I don't know how I found myself here. I don't know how I find myself in many places, but in our valley here, I have become that suicide expert, meaning the fallout, meaning I work with a number of families who have lost a family member to suicide. And I use that when I'm working with people who are, considering, contemplating, and what have you, is that as much as I'd like to say otherwise and not be discouraging, those families are never the same. They're never the same. They're never the same. I don't even know how to put it into words, but they suffer with that pain the rest of their lives. They suffer with that loss the rest of their lives. And I share that. And with some people, and you would know this, the pain is so great and that it's not going to be a factor. In fact, one of the things that is interesting is that historically, when one does take their life, I'll be met with this comment of, oh, what a selfish person.
Oh.
How could he or she do that?
Yeah.
What were they thinking? They just only think about themselves. And so, while we want to find reasons not to, the other thing that I try to do as a clinician and as a representative, within our community, is to emphasize that the lay person who doesn't struggle with chronic suicidality or who has had attempts has no concept of the level of pain, true level of physical, emotional, unbearable pain that brings one to that place when they do act on it and follow through. That the judgment that comes with it, I try to educate that it's a pain that we don't know. We just don't know.
Well, and also I get that a lot. I was sitting next to a guy I was just doing stand-up comedy, sitting next to a guy who had lost his son to suicide. And he said, it was selfish. And I said, I understand why you feel that way. I said, but I've been to the edge of that cliff, and ironically, it's exactly the opposite. I felt like a burden. I had $1 million life insurance policy, so I was actually literally worth more to my wife alive than dead. So in my mind, it was, and I'm sure in the mind of a lot of people who get there who feel like a burden, it is an unselfish act, ironically, not a selfish act.
Yeah, they feel like they're relieving, for so many stressors. A question that comes up for me often, and I wonder if you get this when you're speaking with the college students, because I'm hearing it more and more and more, and looking at how to equip people with this, is that, what if someone is posting, suicidal messages on social media? Or what if a friend, is saying, I'm going to kill myself? Frank, how do you approach that, or what do you teach kids?
Well, I say if they are in immediate danger to themselves or others, not much choice but to dial 911. Or if it's in a distance, because I'm like you, Dr. Lisa. I've become, for all my friends and family, we'll ask Frank. He's suicidal. He'll know. Yeah.
I get that, guys. I get that too. I will have family call me, and the same problem is happening this over and over and over again with the same child, or now, adult child, and nothing gets done. I'm like, why do you even call me to ask? Well, you do shows on, mental health. I'm like, oh my gosh.
You're a gastroenterologist, you don't even know it.
Yeah.
But so 911 is one, but then we have the issue or the challenge that they don't want to breach confidentiality, right? So I've told them I won't tell their parents, or I've told them that I'm going to be here for them, and I'm afraid that if I tell their parents or get someone in authority or call 911, that they won't talk to me anymore. How do you respond to that?
I address that with the college students, because I've had people say to me, I believe my roommate is depressed. I think she is suicidal. She told me, she came out and told me, but she swore me to secrecy. And I want to call her parents, but she'll never speak to me again. And I get it's not a clinical or scientific answer, but I should call her parents. And let them know, and she may never speak to you again, but I'd rather have her alive and not speaking to me and have unfriended me on Facebook than not have called her parents, and then for the rest of my life wish I had picked up the phone and done that. And I had an example. A young woman was in that very situation with her roommate, and her daughter had been calling home all semester how miserable she was, and her mom, no, honey, it's just homesickness. Just no, you don't come home. You just have to go, cowgirl up, and everybody, it's their first year of college. It's not the 13th year of high school. And finally, the roommate called her mom and said, look, it's more serious than you think. And she sent the mom my first TEDx talk, a link. Where I come out as depressed and suicidal. And her mom watched the TEDx talk, called her daughter, and said, you are coming home. You are going to come home. We're going to find a therapist here. And if it works out that you go to school here, community college, fine. If you feel like going back to college, that's fine too. Just come home.
And that happens often if it's handled that way, that they do come home and they do get the help that they need and they return. I think that sometimes parents have the fear that if they come home, they'll never go back. But, she'll never talk again. They'll never go back. That's not an option if they're not here.
Well, and I also get kids who are from very conservative religious families. African-American gentleman, I can't remember which college, and he had definitely had chronic suicidality. We shared some stories, things that we thought about on an average day. And he said, do you think I'm just looking for attention? I said, no. I said, what are your folks? Did you mention it to your folks? Very religious, high up in the church, very active in the church. They gave me a Bible and the minister's name. I said, okay, you're away at college. your folks are a good distance from here. The college has a wonderful mental health service. I would start here, where no one from there will know that you have begun therapy. And so that's, that's one of the benefits of being away at school with a good mental health facility is you can go ahead and begin getting help. And when I do a speech, I'm always mindful of the kids. I did a show at Spokane Hills Community College. Did a little slideshow, and we opened it up for questions. And the kid goes, "Can you go back a few slides?" So I went back. And he goes, "Farther, farther, farther, stop." And the slide we stopped on was the number for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the text line. I go, "That one?" I go, "That one?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." Made a mental note. He and I were going to talk as soon as I got done. And in fact, he had thoughts. Good news is he had seen a therapist, was going to see him again on campus that afternoon. But I told the organizers, "Look, you need to keep a close eye on this kid because, and when we spoke after my presentation, he was crying." So.
Well, and I try to teach the kids that it takes a tremendous amount of courage to come forward and say, not only am I thinking about it, I am going to do it, and you need to keep me safe. I need you to keep me safe. And, I commend them because that's a terrifying thing to do. And it's not a common thing to do. And so the more I see that done, the more I can tell other people about it, that, I used to say back in the day, and this is ignorant, I look back and I kind of cringe, but I used to say this statement that if someone has decided to kill themselves, there's nothing you can do to stop them. Whereas if someone is not going to kill themselves, there's nothing you can do to make them do that. And, what we're seeing so much more lately is, with the rise in the attention, is that there's a lot that we can do to intervene, a lot. And, turning our backs on it and go, well, they're suicidal, they're going to do it one day, inevitably, is not the approach, and not that I would encourage that approach, but, it used to be of the mindset that you can't stop someone who's considering it, but it's so common, as you say, and as you experience, to have that chronic feeling that it's an option if your car breaks down. And then how do I navigate and work through that option of going, no, but I'm not going to. And these are the reasons why I'm not going to. And I'm aware within myself that option pops up on a fairly regular basis daily, probably several times during the day. And that doesn't mean that I have to, or that doesn't mean that I'm going to follow through with that.
Well, and I was on campus. A young woman came up afterwards and asked if she'd give me a hug. Now, we are in the middle of the Me Too movement. Everybody in the room's got a video camera called a smartphone. So I'm thinking, me splashed all over the internet. 62-year-old speaker gropes co-ed. So I kind of leaned over at the waist, kind of a brotherly, stiff hug. And I said to her, "Are you a hugger?" And she goes, "No, not normally." I said, "Well, why did you?" She goes, "Well, I've been in therapy for 6 months, and the woman who is my therapist is a wonderful clinician. She knows her stuff. She's got a great education. She's well qualified. But I'm sitting back there listening to you tell your story, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he's inside my head. He gets it." And I wonder, Dr. Lisa, if we could do away with this sort of, it's not a rule, it's just a tradition that clinicians don't share their struggles, at least in general, not even in general, with their clients. And I wonder if, if the clinician would share, I know the old story of you don't ask after a massage therapist gives you a massage, you don't turn around and go, "Now do me." But, go ahead.
Absolutely. So I would tell you that, one of the things I love, and I don't know if I was talking to you, Kristin, about this, or if I was talking to someone. Oh, no, I was talking to someone who's doing a documentary on schizophrenia. We need to talk about that. But I was saying one of the things I love about Mental Health News Radio is that it's not across the desk kind of information. We are real people with real experiences, with real challenges. So, podcast-wise, we're all over that. But I would tell you, I've had a full practice since being out of grad school, 3 months. I've been full, more clients than I've ever wanted to see. And there is that no self-disclosure ethic in there. But I'm here to tell you the single most powerful feedback that I get from my clients, what's different about you, what's different, and I'll say what's different about me, because they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I've worked with 6 different therapists and you're taking me there." And it's that when I give examples that I have actually done, because the most believable material is if it's real. Now, and we can educate therapists this way, and I actually will educate my intern this way, is there's a difference between self-disclosure in essence of an example, and to provide a sense of comfort, safety, and security. There's a difference between that and moving into the client seat. So if you were telling me, about your suicidality, and I said, oh man, have I really been struggling with that this week? I don't know what I'm going to do about it. How do you cope with it? So if I become a client, then it's inappropriate, because I'm going to burden my client, right? But if you're talking about,
Right.
coping mechanisms, and I'm talking about implementing boundaries, and I say, when I had this difficulty this morning, and my daughter had my Italian boots on and they were stomping in the water, I say to her, you know what, sweetheart, that doesn't work well for me, and I'm going to ask that you take them off. That's a believable example. And so with suicidality, with major depression, so many times, I mean, even Paul Meyer will talk about different medications, in his own personal experience, and it makes the practitioner real. And so to the extent that we can incorporate that, and clinicians can be able to share in a way that's not burdensome to their clients, but then invites them to, I'm a real person who has been through real struggles. One of the things that I teach, and I tell most of my clients this, I will not teach you anything I don't personally practice on a regular basis. So I am going to teach you what I know works, steadfast, hard, and true. And I will also tell them the difference between you and I don't have a desk. I have a nice fancy couch, comfy couch, and I have a nice comfy chair that matches the couch. And I say the difference between you and I is the time that I've had to implement the skills that you are struggling with. Your challenges are something that are familiar and heartfelt to me. And this is what I have found, both with myself and with many people that I've worked with, that is absolutely helpful in navigating through that. So that is I may have goosebumps going down my spine. That is such a powerful point to bring up, Frank. It really is. That you're not some, whacked person, that you struggle with this. We all have our challenges. We all are in this thing we call life. And how do we navigate it together? And how can I hold your hand, both as an educator or support, and someone who's crossed that bridge or who lives with that challenge? How can we navigate this? And again, Kristin, you do such a phenomenal job with the podcasters that you have on Mental Health News Radio, because it's real. You give real examples. Frank gives real examples. I give real examples. And I think that's what's setting you apart, or setting us apart, I guess.
So I will say this. I was talking with Joe Fusaro, who also is a podcaster on the network with Hysteria Radio, which is all about poetry and writing and music, and how that affects our mental health. It's phenomenal. And he also edits a lot of our shows, including mine. And he had said to me the other day, he edits a lot of shows that are not on the network. And he, is like the different thing that he notices about us and our podcasters is that these are real, authentic conversations. They're not, got my nails done yesterday, and oh yeah, we went to this party, and oh blah 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 blah, which that's fine. I'm not putting down those kinds of conversations. You want to talk about that, go right ahead. But for him, as a podcast listener, he's like, I want to hear the meat of someone's life, and that is what we give. We give the meat of what's going on, really going on, not the fluff about what we want to say is going on, like we just talked about with Jonathan Bertrand on the show we did before this, the real meat of things. And that's why I think, I love so much this network, and I love so much working with Meyer Clinics, and I love so much Frank King. And now I'm giving shout outs to, see how I'm doing that with everybody here. So anyway,
it's real.
It's real for real,
That's
people.
Right.
You need to go to thementalhealthcomedian.com and check out Frank King. You also need to go to Meyer Clinics, MEIER clinics.com, find out more about Dr. Lisa Day. And if you want to find out about the amazing, incredible people that are on our network, you can just go to mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Thank you both for coming on and doing this show. Absolutely appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kristin and Frank.
And thank you to our listening family for tuning in for yet another show on Meyer Clinics podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.